This is Dr. Barissa Perlman with La Petite Creme, and this is Beyond the Diaper, a podcast where we talk about medical issues within the context of self care and motherhood. I'm here with a special guest today, Britt Foster Rothstein, who is an end of life educator. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, wonderful. So, we are talking about a topic that sometimes people don't think about or don't talk about until at times where they need to. So being an end of life educator, describe to me what that means.
So it's funny, I became interested in this work when my father, who passed away at 87 in 2019, was at the end of his life. There were just so many holes in our care, even though we had a great team of people.
Mhm.
And I realized I was unprepared for a lot of it. And at the same time as he was dying, my children were young. My daughter was born in 2014, my son in 2010. So I was navigating the loss of, losing him over time and raising my children and also sort of trying to figure out, myself in all of this. And
Right.
so I realized I wanted sort of a set of skills, and I was a teacher by training. That was my background. I was a high school English teacher for years. And so I went into this work, and, at first it was a lot about the nuts and bolts of loss and actual, transitioning from life to death. But really what drew me the more I was in the space was really this idea of grief, that there's so much grief that we're all carrying all the time. And a lot of people, when my father did finally pass away, said, "Oh gosh, you must be in so much grief." And I said, "Well, I've been in grief for years, honestly, because he had been in declining health for a long time. So
Hmm.
seeing those changes, knowing, this is the last time I'm sitting at his house with him. This is the last time
Yeah.
I'm doing this. This might be all of those little losses sort of accumulated over time. And at the same time, grappling with, well, what does my identity look like as my dad is passing, as I'm, he
Hmm.
does he know my children? How, to what degree will they remember him? How can I carry
Hmm.
his legacy forward? What will that look like? So yeah, I really, have so much interest in this, and it's a really huge field. So you can pretty much, there's just a lot of need, because one of the things we know is that we're all going to experience loss, both of our own lives at some point, and, you know, serious big losses like physical passings, and then lots of other very,
Hmm.
very meaningful losses. And it's certainly in parenthood. I feel like, we talk about often, of course, the
Hmm.
joy of becoming a parent, the excitement of becoming a parent, but there's a lot of grief there. And, I think as
Hmm.
women, we're not always encouraged to consider that. And I don't think men are invited to either. Don't
Yeah.
misunderstand. I just think as, as it's, oh, you must be so excited.
Hmm.
It's like, yes, I am. And at the same time, I'm also miss being able to leave my house without
Hmm.
scheduling it like it's a Navy SEAL operation, you
Hmm.
know, and
Hmm.
I can't do that anymore. And that's, where do
Yes.
I put that feeling, and who
Yeah.
can I even talk to about it? And so there's a lot
Yeah.
there.
Well, I think that the image that I have in my mind is actually of holding space.
Yeah,
And a
exactly.
lot of people who we often think of end of life very literally.
Yes,
So it's the idea that you're almost not allowed to talk
that's
about
right.
grief
That's right.
unless you're losing physically somebody.
That's right.
And even in that space,
And even then we don't have a lot going
right,
for
we
you
don't
there.
even have a lot of
No,
space there. So
no,
so
no.
the first battle is trying to create that space on the
That's right.
literal aspect. So
That's right.
unfortunately, families, we experience loss, whether it be a partner, our children, God forbid, our like loved ones, multi-generational,
Yes.
loved
Yeah,
ones, a
absolutely. Of
pet, I mean, so everyone's
course.
like, okay, I get it. That's where, you should talk about end of life, or you should talk about
Right.
grief.
Right.
um a miscarriage, right,
Right.
is a
Absolutely.
big piece. So like these are places where I think people would agree, or it would be obvious to them,
Right.
right? And
That's
I
right.
think that one of the things that a lot of discussions of grief have brought is not just grief, right? We talk a lot about, maybe in the last maybe 30 or 40 years, coupling grief rituals,
Yes.
grieving rituals with
Yes.
celebration rituals,
Right.
which I think is not
Absolutely.
something that was existing 30, 40, 50 years
No.
ago.
Right.
So I love that coupling, but it's interesting because that duality
Yes.
does appear. It does appear in settings beyond physical loss.
Absolutely.
So you alluded to them, and I think that that's if I'm going to push a little further. So I'm going
Please.
to push a little bit further
Please.
to the idea of how grief and parenthood kind of live in the same place.
Hmm.
And you alluded
Yes.
to that earlier, but I think particularly women, this whole idea that all of childbearing, all of child raising should only be filled with happiness,
Only
with
happiness.
joy,
Oh,
only
yes. Only
happiness and
joy.
joy.
And it's, for me too, I mean, my own journey was that, and as I got into this work and sort of reflected on, my experience becoming a mom, first thing, I became, I was grateful and also terrified to become
Yeah,
very quickly
yeah,
pregnant with my first son,
yeah.
my first child, who is a boy. I thought that, it was going to take forever. I had it in my mind. So when we got pregnant the first try, I thought I was both elated and also like, I thought I had more time.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, what? Ah, but I was just only supposed to be happy. And then, I felt really sick and I could no longer participate in a lot of the day-to-day things that I loved doing. And, even just not being able to eat certain things. I remember, my husband and I went to Paris when I was pregnant and I was so excited and we were like on a baby moon, which I spent a lot of like lying in bed. And obviously that's a champagne problem. But, I was fixated on this idea that I couldn't eat any cheese I wanted. I was like, wait, why? Okay, it's unpasteurized. Not that I even have a craving for unpasteurized cheese.
Yeah,
That's not a thing for me.
right.
It's not a passion. But somehow being told, you can't, all of a
Yes.
sudden the restrictions and limitations start. And
Yeah.
again, that's okay, but it's not without loss.
Yeah.
And I think, and especially as women, we're made to feel really selfish a lot. Like but all you should care about is a healthy baby. Of course, all I care about is a healthy baby. And I also wish I felt better. I also wish I could go out to dinner without wanting to throw up in the bathroom or,
Hmm.
even have the energy to get through the workday. Like I had to, share with my colleagues before I was ready that I was pregnant so that they wouldn't think I had become ill.
Hmm.
And that
Yes.
wasn't really what I wanted to do. And it wasn't the timeline I wanted, but it was like I was forced into that basically because of something beyond my control. And that felt
Yeah.
really bad.
Yeah.
And then, again, when even just, you have the baby and then your relationship to your own body changes.
Yeah.
And often too, I was, wanting a natural birth. I had my doula, I was my midwife, I was all excited. And then I had an emergency C-section, which wasn't what I had wanted. And obviously, I wanted it because it saved my child. It was a very dramatic situation, and we were in great hands
Sure.
medically. And I'm very grateful for it.
Hmm.
And it really was hard to kind of
Yeah.
not only have I had this birth that was really scary and traumatic, frankly,
Yeah.
but no one's even acknowledging that this has happened to me. Everyone's just
Mhm.
like, oh, you have this healthy baby. And I'm like, yes, and thank goodness. And I was also terrified. And
Yeah.
I was totally forgotten about in the midst of
Yeah.
that. And then I'm recovering from major abdominal surgery and trying to figure out how to breastfeed. And I remember driving, we were living in New York City when my son was born. And I remember we lived in Morningside Heights and
Hmm.
we were driving uptown and I felt every bump in the Volvo. We were in, I just, every little, and I just, it felt it in my bones. And I was like, wow, the sort of rough energy of the city had always excited me. It had always brought me joy. And suddenly that felt really scary and overwhelming. And so even just existing in a place that I loved and felt very comfortable in suddenly changed. And that was really hard. And no one was asking about that. And I didn't even really have the presence of mind to talk
Yeah.
about it because I was sleep deprived
Hmm.
and stressed and, dealing with digestive issues and all sorts of things. So but you just, these things accumulate over time
Hmm.
and, finding where to put them and how to talk about them is something I'm really passionate about because I think, not only is it good for us as parents, but it's good for our kids too. Again, they
Mhm,
need to see us learn that something is never all amazing or all
mhm,
awful,
mhm,
because they're going to have struggles and they're going to have transitions and they're going to, possibly become parents one day. And if we've
mhm,
only ever told them the story that everything is sunshine and rainbows,
mhm.
that's not going to serve them very well when they
Yeah.
come face to face with the reality that things are just more complex than that.
Yes. And I think that, modern day world, we feel like we've become so cultivated and curated and we're so advanced. And yet we have such a hard time dealing with a very ancient idea
Yes, absolutely.
that many things can exist all at once. It's almost like being in this need to represent things, in a very kind of like black and white manner
Right.
so
That's
they're
right.
more palatable.
That's right. That's
We've
right.
like forced everyone to choose.
That's right.
And in the choosing, you actually feel incredible amounts of guilt
Absolutely.
either
And
way you
shame.
move, and
So much
shame
shame. So much
through
shame.
each way,
Yes.
and I think that again, just holding that space. The first time I kind of encountered the idea of grief in a situation that wasn't the obvious situation was I was working as a resident in the NICU, and you have babies who are critically ill, and these
Right.
are babies that are so unfortunate at a very young age. Parents are having to deal with life and death, right?
Of course. Absolutely.
And I had an attending who was like, you need to give parents a moment to grieve.
Hmm.
And we were like, grieve, but their babies are alive. Like, how
Yeah.
dare they grieve? What are they
Right. Of
grieving?
course. What are they
And
doing?
shouldn't they be
That's
grateful?
so negative.
What are they
Why would they
grieving?
do that? Don't they love their baby?
And what that attending said is that you're going to give them a moment to grieve that perfect delivery where they go home the
Absolutely.
next day
Yes. That's right.
and everything's wonderful and they go home and it's great and the baby's healthy. There's not a care in the world.
That's right.
You need to grieve that
That's right.
expectation.
That's right.
And I remember just being kind of like overwhelmed
Right.
by how and only over years of raising my own children who are in their 20s
Yes.
now have I actually really been able to like process how toxic many times
Yes.
our expectations are of how
Yes.
everything will go and
Yes.
how everything
Yes.
should be,
That's right.
playing God in our own mind when we have like no
Yes.
license or
That's
ability,
right.
frankly,
Right. No
to do
ability to.
that.
That's the part that's always just, in our
Just
own
a
minds, we're
reminder.
so powerful. And then sometimes the world is like, ha ha ha, just
Yeah,
kidding.
no, yeah, no, it doesn't
You're
work like
so
that.
funny. Hold my beer. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about here. Yeah. No.
Yeah, it's like man plans, God laughs. I mean, it's like,
Yeah, totally.
and it's a kind
Uh-huh.
of thing where like it became so clear so many times in many courses of the transitions of raising children
Yeah,
that, I always say like parents plan and kids laugh hysterically, right? Because
absolutely.
nothing ever
No.
happens the way you should. You think it should, or you think it,
No,
I don't
that's
even know
right.
why you think it is, but we do have this fixed idea. And when
Absolutely.
you are allowed, or when you are actually purposefully making space for exactly what you're saying, where it's like, I don't know what's going to happen, and there's going to be a mixture of emotions and I'm going to go through different feelings and it's going to be incredibly chaotic,
Right.
and I'm okay with that.
And I'm okay with that. Yeah.
You actually put yourself in a different position where you're more able to move with the wind of what raising children and life is like.
And life, because
um
you're raising them alongside your own life, which is throwing you curveball after curveball,
that's
sometimes
it.
related to your kids, sometimes not.
Yes, yes. And being
And,
able to kind of be,
how are you going to do that?
we have this whole thing of like the helicopter parent.
Yeah.
We have this whole thing now of the performative parent, which came with the advent of social media. Because
Right.
in social media, it's
Of
all
course.
about the perfect picture, it's all
Absolutely.
about the perfect story.
That's
And
right.
it's really driving us in a conscious and subconscious way to, again, that dualistic binary idea of
Yes,
like either you're really happy or you're really sad,
really not. That's right.
and you're really not allowed to be both. But so much, there's very little, and to that end, when I have moments in our lives, I enjoy the times that we're happy, but I'm also a little skittish because I'm like, I
Yeah,
know
of course.
happiness and sadness, they come together.
Yes, that's right.
So much of life is a mixture. So I almost,
That's
there was a
right.
monk that was asked once, like, you're a monk, you must be happy all the time, which is kind of a
No.
bizarre question. If you really
Right.
know monks, they don't
I'm
really
like,
give
this
that
doesn't
vibe.
seem
Yeah,
like, that doesn't
I don't
draw the
get
like happy, breezy
that.
guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not usually.
Mm-mm. Something
So
tells me no.
yeah, so the monk was like, I don't want to be happy all the
Right.
time because
Yeah.
it's a pendulum, and very closely that pendulum needs to fall and go towards sadness. So I almost
Yes.
know that that's where the pendulum's going to fall, and I'd rather sit in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the reason why I wanted to speak to you today about grief on the everyday life of parents, but of people in general, is because it's all about, we all talk about having trouble being present.
Right.
And I
That's right.
feel like being able to welcome grief into
Yes.
our daily life
Yes.
allows us to be able to be present, right, in
Absolutely.
our everyday, and
100%.
hold all the emotions versus what most of us do, which is what you were doing and what I remember doing, just plowing ahead, just
Right. Just
plow
keep
ahead.
going. Right.
Oh, that feels kind of weird. I'm going to run from that and I'm going to
Well,
go towards another thing. I don't
exactly.
really think
That's right.
that I was giving myself, or that I was encouraged to give my family, those moments to be like, this really sucks. And, this is great.
Right. And it also isolates us, right? When we're not
Yeah.
sitting with our grief, not only are we not present because we're trying to push something away from us, but then we can't connect to other people. I like one
Mm,
of my first days teaching high school, which, is a scary place for a new teacher. I was 25. Barely older than some of the kids I was teaching. And, there's a lot. You're doing all these different tasks and you're trying to do your best. And I remember one of my mentors saying, hey, Brett, anytime you're struggling and you feel like you're just doing the worst job, or you're really drowning in papers, or you feel like you're never going to get all this work done, just shout it out. And someone else in this room, because we shared a big office, will say, same here. And it was such a beautiful offer. And I took him up on it numerous times because sure enough, I'd be sitting there, right, trying to respond thoughtfully to a parent and not finding the words and going, oh, this is driving me nuts. Or, oh my gosh, I have 500 essays to grade. Why did I assign this much work? And somebody else would say, oh gosh, same here. Oh, brutal. And just that connection kept just
mhm.
made me not feel so lonely. And I feel like as parents and as people, when we're grieving things and we share that with other people, we we can have a moment of connection. And I think especially as we
Mhm.
get older, and also I think when our kids were small, I was you're forging ahead, and part of that is just survival. You physically have
Mhm.
to. You're keeping them alive, like quite
Mhm.
literally, because if you decide to like stare off into space and reflect, like they'll run into traffic. Like you can't,
Right.
like you have to be
Right.
dialed in. But as they get older, and you're kind of going, like, oh, well, okay, I'm feeling alone here. I don't know what to do. And also, I think, another piece where the grief piece is really critical is as we're raising our kids, we're remembering our own childhood. We're looking back
Mhm.
and we're looking forward. And sometimes we're
Yeah.
really sad with what we see.
Yeah.
Sometimes words come out of our mouth. We've all had this experience, and we hear a parent,
Right.
or we hear a grandparent and sometimes we think, oh, that's what my dad, your mom used to say to me. And sometimes we think, I swore I would never do that. And I just did
Yeah.
it. Oh my gosh, what does this mean? Like, so I think we're, even if you've done work, like I was, professionally in therapy for many years, like you think you've dealt with your stuff, but then you have a kid and they're like, just
Yes.
kidding. There's stuff you
Yes.
didn't think you knew to think about. And here it is right here
Yes.
in the middle
Well,
of my meltdown. Good luck
yeah.
staying regulated. Have fun.
Well, the thing that's a little bit tricky is that there's wiring there.
Absolutely.
And that wiring, we think we got it all. Like we got,
Yeah.
got all the bits, that
Oh,
are
yeah.
triggering us, that are going to
Oh,
make
yeah.
us, really
Yeah.
hesitate and doubt ourselves. But that wiring is deep.
Deep.
And when you kind of see it in front of you, whether it be in the form of a tantrum or even like in something a child says to you that
Oh,
all of a sudden
yes.
triggers you and you
Yes.
respond a certain way, that
Yes.
interaction, it is, it behooves you to take a moment and to
Absolutely.
say, where is that wiring? And that wiring is often laid down in grief. Maybe you're
Yeah.
like maybe
Right.
you're like a 6-year-old, or you're even like a
Right.
10-year-old,
Yeah.
and someone said something really cruel to you.
Yeah.
Whether you liked it or not, that wiring is in your head.
Absolutely.
And so at that moment, maybe you should have had a moment to say, hey, like resolved it somehow, processed it somehow. But we think, oh well, I've notated it. There's a flag there.
Yes. Right.
And then when it, flash forward 20 years,
Uh-huh.
you're saying it to your kid and you're like, I I flagged it. Like I was trying to make sure
I
I
knew
didn't
that
go
was a
there.
problem. Right. Right.
Why
Right.
is this coming
Yeah.
up again?
Why?
And it does, and you realize there's a lot of wiring that just kind of comes a little bit more to the surface when you have
Yes.
children.
Absolutely.
You start to kind of and I talk a lot about parents, again, with full intention. Again, I think this is one of the first generations where we've been very
Right.
intentional,
We're really trying.
almost to a fault, almost
Almost
to
to
a
a point where it's
fault.
like, girl, just do
Don't
your
overthink
best,
this. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like,
Don't
come
overthink
on.
this.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
have a lot of people who are very intentional about trying to like not reproduce patterns that were
Sure.
dysfunctional or
Absolutely.
toxic in their lives.
Right.
But on the other hand, sometimes because of our past experience, we see the patterns there and they're not there. We're worried about something that hasn't yet happened.
That's right.
Like if you've had sibling rivalries or issues in the
Right.
past,
Yes.
and you look at your kids and you see them fighting and you're like, oh my God,
Oh,
is it
no,
just
they're
going to
gonna
be
hate each
like
other.
conflict? Yeah,
They're
just like
gonna, what
right,
happens when I die? And they're not gonna be good to each other. They're gonna be
right.
fighting. And it's like, wait,
It did
they're two
happen.
and five.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, it did happen, right?
it's probably fine. Right.
Right.
Like it
But
hasn't happened yet.
what should have happened is that whatever dysfunction was existing in your past space, that needs to be grieved. Like that need to be
Absolutely.
like, you know what?
Absolutely.
I didn't really have a
Yes.
great experience with my siblings. That was rough, and
And
I
that was
hope my
hard,
kids do, but that's about all you can do.
but that's about
And
all you can do.
right. And I think that because you never properly grieved it and kind of said, hey, that was them, that was that time of their lives, that was that chemistry of people,
Right.
and kind of like let it sit there, you dragged it. You dragged it into your current life
That's right.
and said, I'm going to make sure I'm going to manipulate time, because that really sounds like something we can do.
Because it's
I'm gonna
super easy to do that.
I'm gonna manipulate it so that like that doesn't happen real without really even processing. Like it has these two, they really have nothing to do
Exactly.
with each other.
No.
These two spaces don't have anything to do with each other.
I think that speaks to, you alluded to it earlier. It's like we think we have all this power and we have all this agency. And, I mean, I know I'm speaking to, like probably a lot of women and maybe men too listening to this podcast. Like we're, you're high achieving. You've been able to make things happen. You're people who get things done and are able to effectuate change and make plans and do all of these things. And then we come face to face with the reality that we have a lot less control than we think we do. And all we can ever really control is our reaction to things that are happening. And that is both very lovely and amazing, and also really frustrating and hard. And I think grieving that is
Hmm.
important because we again, we, like you're saying, you think you can affect your children's relationship with one another to a certain point. I mean, can you
Yeah.
possibly help them process it? Maybe, but that's about it. You're not going to set up their dynamic because they have temperaments that they've come into this world with, and they're going to, you know, clash, come together, and do all of that. And there's not a ton that you can really do about it. And I think, as we think we can make all this happen, it again goes to that expectation of I should be able to. I think it was Glennon Doyle who says don't should all over yourself. Like we should be able to make this happen. I should be doing this. I should be able to make these changes. Even and I've struggled with this a lot, my own parenting journey. Like I
Mm.
thought just knowing certain things that I both wanted to keep similar and change would be enough, but it's not. And it's something, it helps, it's important, but there's a lot of uh self-forgiveness too, and self-compassion. And I think that actually, to me, grief and self-compassion are also you know
Mm.
friends. We because when we allow ourselves to grieve, we're allowing ourselves to say something we wanted that didn't
Hmm.
happen, or that was taken
Yes.
from us. And even if it was taken like an actual human life, or whether it was taken like an idea, like you mentioned the attending in the NICU, that was an idea that you had and it's gone. And that
Hmm.
is so hard. And it's
Hmm.
hard to admit that it's not enough for you in that moment, that even though again, two things can be true. Those parents are both so grateful their child is alive, and they're really grieving this other
Hmm.
idea that's gone, and the
Yeah.
reality that they're now faced with and their child is faced with. That's not easy.
Yeah.
So I
Um,
just, yeah, there's a lot there.
I love this idea of linking grieving and self-care and self-compassion. Um, just the phrase unresolved grief.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
just unresolved grief, it is so distracting.
So distracting.
And it
Yes,
really pulls you from the present. It
absolutely.
it leaches energy that could be
That's
spent,
right.
like legs in the ground, like feet on the ground,
Right.
knees bent, ready
Absolutely.
to kind of move with whatever way your life
Right.
decides to be
That's
with.
right. Right.
But if you are lugging a whole
Uh-huh.
caravan of unresolved grief,
Oh, yes.
you can't you can't keep up with life. You can't
You
keep up with
cannot.
it.
Not only can you not keep up with it, you can't connect with people either. It limits your ability to receive love from people, and it limits your ability to love other people because we're trying to, to take the sibling example, if you had a contentious relationship with your siblings and that's something that you have not properly grieved or dealt with, then you're going to be bringing that into your relationship with your kids, into relationship with your partner, and you're going to be pushing everyone away. And you're not getting any care out of that either. You're not. I think, I think a lot of us, at least, coming. I'm 47, so there was a lot of like, well, just move on, just move on,
Mhm.
just move on. And it's like, okay. And again, that was, a step up from probably what my parents experienced, which was like, oh, you're there? Like, oh, this thing happened? Okay, well, it's Tuesday. So
Yeah,
keep
yeah.
going. So, I think, at every, generation, we have this opportunity to try to uh, look at our wants and our needs and our desires, look at the reality of what has happened and is happening in our
Hmm.
lives, and try to integrate those things, try to be kind to ourselves. Um, and also I think it can, in the case of generational trauma and things, it can offer compassion to your parents, your grandparents. There's this line in a Noah Kahn song, who's been my recent,
Mm.
obsession, where he says, and I'm still mad at my parents for what their parents did to them.
Yeah.
And, I was like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot. But the more we, don't talk about it because we don't, again, I think a lot of us feel shame around grief. It feels embarrassing. And again, especially, I mean, I think of, when after my father died, I was at the kids' school doing, some volunteering, and another mom who I knew casually, said, "Oh, Brett, I want to ask you about your dad, but I wasn't sure if, bringing it up was hard or upsetting. I didn't want to upset you." And I said, "Well, I didn't forget my dad died. So when you don't bring it up, it makes me think you forgot my dad died, which would be
Right.
reasonable because you're a
Right.
busy person with 100 things going on and we're not best friends." And yes, that's talking about a physical death, but when we don't normalize all of these other,
Yes.
losses, whether it's a pregnancy loss, whether it's a job loss, whether it's a,
Mhm.
even just the loss of your, identity as it shifts in a partnership
Mhm.
when you
Mhm.
have children.
Mhm.
As much as like, my husband was very like wanting to be, hands-on and did a lot of, was right there in the thick of it with me. There were certain things only I was doing because, I was breastfeeding. So like that's not something he can be doing.
Yeah.
There were
Yep.
certain things that just weren't, it wasn't an option for us to divide
Yeah.
equally. And, um, so I think, and for him, he talked about the grief of, you know, coming home and saying, gosh, nobody's asked me how my like work-life balance is. No
Mhm.
one's asked
Mhm.
me. I have a child
Mhm.
now. I didn't have a child last month. And now,
Yep.
everyone's asking you, when are you going back to work? What is your schedule? What
Yep.
is it? No one's asking how I'm doing,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that's a grief too. It's like, wait, I've had
Mhm.
this big life change and nobody's even clocking it.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And
Like
and just
that,
our again,
that
and
feels
just
bad.
folding. And I mean, it's interesting because when I think that there's something. It's funny because when you brought up the idea of not expressing grief leads to loss of community, it took me a second. I've been kind of processing it through our whole conversation. And it's this idea, which I really like, that when it's not spoken,
It's not
when
spoken.
space is not given,
That's right.
it is a lost opportunity
That's right.
to show a piece of yourself and for the other people to reveal themselves
That's right.
in a moment that doesn't need to linger and stay
That's right.
forever, but
No,
it can, if it's just normalized,
that's right.
it's you're giving permission for it to be
Absolutely.
as natural as taking a deep breath.
Right. And I think too, when you have those little moments, because I think a lot of us, I mean, I struggled with postpartum depression after my first child was born. And, I would sit in the bathroom and sob. And I was totally alone. And it was, really scary a lot of the time. And I felt like I could not talk about it. And I think what would have really helped me, and I had dear, I'm fortunate. I have dear, dear friends
Yeah.
and I have a great partner and I, have all this support but it was still just really lonely and
Hmm.
isolating. And as I talked about it, really in preparation to have our daughter, it was like I was able, I became I was in a newcomers club in our town outside of New York City,
Mm.
and I signed up to be president of it when our daughter was born, which might sound like a very odd thing to do when you're about to have a newborn. But for me, it was about getting out and making sure I was out doing things because I knew
Yeah.
I needed to communicate with people. And
Hmm.
I just kind of decided I'm going to show up authentically as like a stressed mom because a lot of us
Yeah.
are stressed moms. We're all living in the
Yeah.
suburbs and we're new here. So like
Yeah.
none of us
Yeah.
like put together single people are not living in the suburbs.
Yeah.
It's all of us like new parents who are all like frantically running from the train and all of this.
Yeah.
And like, just saying like, oh, this is hard or oh man, this is frustrating or it doesn't have to be. I think also we think of grief as like we have to like bare our soul and sob and there is a
Hmm.
part of that is for sure the case, but you can even just something as simple as not saying things are going well when they're not
Yeah.
going well. You
Yeah.
know, how's it going? Well, my child hasn't slept more than 2 hours in 3 weeks, so I feel like I'm a prisoner of war.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
Just saying that Like, again, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean you have to be breaking down, although, again, that's totally fine. But
Yeah.
again, just allowing it to be like, yeah, this is tough. And I think a lot of times when you do that, you invite, like you said, you're creating that space for other people to then kind of, come into that. And like,
Yeah.
my colleague said, say same here. Same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all. That's all
Same.
you need to hear. Yeah.
Like he's not going to grade my papers for me, right? Like you're
Yeah.
not going to come to my house and rock my child at 3 in the morning. But I really appreciate you giving me that knowing look and going like, oof, that was
Yeah.
us last month.
Hmm.
That 4 month sleep regression, I'm still recovering,
Yeah.
whatever it is. All of those things are just ways to connect and
Yeah.
and build community. And I think,
Yeah.
that's what, you were mentioning social media and the way it has created this binary, good, bad, and it has also created this false, in some ways, sense of community, where
Hmm.
it,
Hmm.
in many ways it makes a lot of us feel, like sometimes I'll read, and again, I follow a lot of people in the parenting space, and
Right.
I'll read something, I'll see a post that's giving great tips about like talking to
Hmm.
your neurodivergent child who's stressed out.
Hmm.
But sometimes I look at those scripts and I literally want to sling my phone, against a
Hmm.
wall and go, okay, well, that's just not what I did yesterday. And now I feel really crappy
Hmm.
about it. And now I'm sad
Hmm.
about that. And I don't, oh, and what do I do about that? And that's its own grief too, right? Like, oh,
Hmm.
okay, well, I guess I'm not doing well at that either, you
Yeah.
know? And I
Yeah.
try to hold that with, okay, I didn't do well at that yesterday. And I might not look like that in 3 days, or I might never be able to speak with like a Zen like calm all the time because that's
Hmm.
just not really my vibe. That's okay. Like I'll get there. I can get there and I can be sad.
Yeah.
And and
Yeah.
yeah, that's
I
what we're
think it
trying to
goes
do.
back to what you were saying in the idea that we don't control a lot, but what we
Right.
can control is how we react.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if anyone can come away from this conversation, you may not find people around you that you
That's right.
feel able to share, but at least give yourself that space.
That's right. That's right. And I think
Right?
yeah, and I think, as I've gotten older, we have moved, multiple times. We actually now live in Lisbon, Portugal. But we, have lived in a bunch of different places. And, I joke that each time I move, I just show up as more of myself, right? It's like, okay, here's what it is. You're either going to like it or you're not. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know. It's okay. Because, like you said, saying those things, not only are you opening up a chance for community, which is really important, but you are also being a good friend to yourself. You're
Yeah.
being a good person for yourself. And, like, I think a lot of us, especially women, we have a very negative self-critic, inner critic. And again, like if and I was someone who, again, had done a lot of therapy. I consider myself really tuned, switched on to my emotional state and all of these things, and I can intellectualize all of the things. And and I recently, was in a therapy appointment, and my therapist was asking me like, about my interactions with my partner, and I realized that I was going to him getting frustrated that he wasn't meeting me in a particular way that I wanted. And then she was like, "Well, are you meeting yourself that way?" And
Right.
woof, I was like, oh, oh no, I'm not. I'm being a real jerk to myself. And I'm somehow expecting my partner to compensate for that when that's actually not really, that's not what I'm not upset with him, actually. I'm upset, like, I'm wanting him to do something that I should be doing for me, which is speaking to myself kindly, which is
Mm.
speaking to myself gently and in an encouraging way, and also acknowledging, that again, like when you were talking about that unresolved grief earlier, a lot of us have developed coping mechanisms that we don't want to be doing anymore, or patterns. But we also need to, we can grieve that, and we can also say, hey, that served me at a certain point, that got me through something. And again, that's that ability to hold that space, right? So we can
Mhm.
say, like, hey, I did the best I could with that in the moment. That wasn't great and it's not what I want anymore. But I can be sad that I, handled it that way. But I can also be like, well, it got me through that and that I'm grateful
Mhm.
for. And so that's that,
Mhm.
that idea of reframing, I think,
Mhm.
And we talk about like repair a lot, right, in the mental health space. Like, how do we repair? And in
Mhm.
parenting, we talk a lot about repair with your child, and that's huge. I mean, I think
Right.
an ounce of repair goes, gosh, so far.
Mhm. Mhm.
But we also have to repair with ourselves. I think we want to repair with our child, but if we're still beating ourselves up, going
Yeah.
like, I'm such a piece of garbage that I just handled something
Mhm.
this way,
Mhm.
then we can't really offer that genuine, because
No.
we're bringing all of our unresolved grief to our kid in that moment,
Yeah.
going like, well, I'm
And
sorry I didn't handle it that way, but and then you start with the defensiveness, because again,
yeah.
you haven't dealt with yourself in that way.
Yeah. It's your past should inform you, but it should not distract you.
That's
And
right.
I feel like you get to a certain age where you're like, this is really distracting and I'm just
That's right.
carrying this
That's
and I
right.
need to resolve it
That's right.
because I need to process with my kids and we're
That's right.
moving forward with my kids.
Yes.
So it's not, it's when we talk about dealing with grief, we're not saying sit in it and not
No.
be able to come out.
No.
Use it as a way to kind of close some doors so that you
Exactly.
can be present with what's ahead of you.
Exactly.
Um, and I love the idea, just to go back to this idea of like really resolving your grief is the ultimate self care.
Absolutely.
And
And it's
being able to do
ongoing.
that, it's constant. It's like a
It's
daily thing,
That's right.
and that's okay. Um, Beautiful discussion. Thank you. I love
Thank
that.
you.
Let me
Thank
ask
you for
you a
having
couple of
me.
questions. Yes.
Please.
Let's do a couple of questions I like to ask all my guests. So
Okay.
the first question is, what is something that you have done for yourself and when did you last do it?
So I love this question. So growing up, I was creative, right? I did dance, I wrote poetry, I made jewelry for my friends, I did all sorts of things. And then, as I got older, a lot of that just got harder to access. I was no longer in dance class, I wasn't in writing classes
Yeah.
and things like that. And again, sort of as somebody who loves to achieve things, I was like, well, if there's not a performance or a recital or a this, how can I be doing that? And so I've recently started getting back into some of these things just for their own
Hmm.
sake. So like
Yeah.
earlier today, I just made a little Spotify playlist and started dancing around my apartment.
Yeah.
And I was like, I mean, I'm sure, and I was, of course, like the little voice in my head is like, well, what are you haven't danced in so long. And I was like, you know what? No,
Yeah.
I'm just going for it. I'm just going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
I'm going to start like I've started also a project like repurposing an old scarf. I want to make it a necklace. It
Yeah.
might look super hideous. I have no idea, but it's like, I'm just enjoying that
Right.
because and I was laughing at myself because I was like, I have held off. I've had this idea to make this scarf necklace for so
Mhm.
long, but in my mind it had to somehow be like amazing. And I'm like, no, it just needs to be like, I'm just doing it as fun. Like just
Yeah.
do something because it brings you joy, create something because and I think again for me, like finding things that don't have a purpose outside
Yeah.
of my joy and
Yeah.
enjoyment of it is like that's giving something to me because it shows me,
Yeah.
it's showing myself you have permission to just enjoy something. It doesn't have to be
Yes.
in service to anything else.
No. And I think it's very hard for caretakers of
Oh,
any sort
absolutely.
to understand the value of something that is only for them. Again, there's a
Absolutely.
hint of selfishness that is not
Absolutely.
really there. But
Right.
I say how often only because I do think it's a daily thing. I found myself
Absolutely.
somewhere along the trenches of like working and having young children. And that little bank of resentment
Oh,
would
yes.
just would rise up and I would find
Oh,
like I am going to for 15 minutes watch
yes.
a show that nobody
That's
else
right.
wants to watch
That's
and
right.
I don't care.
And
And
that's
I would
fine.
do it and I would see that little bank go back down so the
Yeah.
resentment would come down. So I actually made it a situation where it was like every day something, little something because people make again a big deal of it and then they don't do it. And
And then
it's
they
like
don't do
no,
it. You
no,
have to just
you
make it
really
like
have to
I've
just do
started
it.
reading a lot. I mean, I've always read a lot, but I've started reading in front of my kids. Like they're doing something else. Like for years, and my kids are now almost 12 and 15.
Mhm.
But, I felt this need to constantly be engaging, constantly be
No.
entertaining. And
Uh,
I was like,
no.
recently my daughter was, wanting a yogurt parfait. And I was like, great. She's like, well, can you get it for me? I said, no, I can't. I'm reading right now. You can get up and get it. Like, love you,
Yeah.
babe. But
Yeah.
like,
Right.
you're walking around the apartment and I'm sitting here
Yeah.
in the middle of
Go for
reading.
it.
And
Yeah.
like, I'm enjoying that and I'm good with this. And
Yes.
like, you can
Yes.
do it. Like, I'm not,
Yeah.
I bought you the
Yeah.
food, it's in the fridge.
It's
I'll make
there. It's
dinner
ready
in
for
an
you.
hour.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
you go do that. Like, I'm going to enjoy this and I'm going to carve this little space for myself. And that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
Yeah,
that boundary, women are really bad about saying that, I don't need to
absolutely.
caretake 24/7. My husband, I always joke, would be like on his phone, not saving the world, playing Candy Crush during those days. And I would always joke that if there was a child on fire running behind him, he would be like, he wouldn't even notice. Whereas I literally, I hear a sound. Do
Oh,
you need
of
something? What's going
course.
on? And
Yes,
I don't,
yes,
and being able to
yes,
dial that down and be like, no,
yes.
no, like I don't need to be the caretaker
Yeah,
24/7.
yeah.
That's a
It's
big thing.
big.
That's a big
It's
thing.
big.
Um, and so the second question is, in the concept that children are born the way they are to heal a family, what is one way of many, I realize, but one way that you can think of that your children have healed a piece of you?
This is like my favorite question. I know. I, I will try to be brief, which is not my strong suit. But for me, growing up, I grew up in a very religious home,
Mm,
and in a very religious part of the country where there were a lot of, you weren't going to have sex until you were married. There was a lot of, it was a lot of purity culture, and so my own sort of sexual awakening was really like assaulted by all of these
yeah,
beliefs and values,
sure,
and
sure.
I didn't have this like comfort in my body.
Yeah,
I went through puberty really early, and that was really horrifying because I was getting all this attention, and and that just
yeah,
felt bad.
yeah.
And so seeing my children like embrace
Mm,
their like sexuality, not even like in terms of their, interacting with other people, even, they're still pretty young,
yeah.
but like just them interacting with their own bodies and the way that
Mhm.
they inhabit their bodies and the way that they feel that desire,
Yeah,
like my daughter
yeah.
will watch people kissing on a show and turn to me and go, "Oh, that like makes me feel a certain way." And I'm like, "Yes,
Mm,
it does."
yeah.
And just something like
Right. It's
that is
okay. It's
like,
good.
and
Right.
yeah, and that normalizing that and just seeing the way that they embody that, um, like it's so freeing to see them be that way. And it just feels like this beautiful corrective experience that I am lucky to see. So,
Yeah. And that's a great
yeah,
celebration, right?
yeah,
Especially
for
kids
sure.
coming of age.
Totally.
Right. And the third question is that what is something or something that a partner or your village did for you that kind of stands out in your memory postpartum that really was meaningful?
So we were fortunate. We had, my husband's parents lived, close-ish to us when we had the kids.
Hmm.
And,
Yeah.
I had a C-section, like I said, emergency C-section with actually both of my children. But my mother-in-law was able to come over every day for six
Mm.
weeks and just take care of all of those tasks of the home. And that made a huge difference to me. It was
Yeah.
just being able to feel like there was another grown up in the room.
Hmm.
You're holding this new baby, and then my mom was able to come in as well,
Yeah.
sort of after that. And, we just like, and my father-in-law was like making me sandwiches, and like my dad came in
Hmm.
town and like took me shopping, like
Hmm.
just being able to like have another adult handling some of, and of course, my
Yeah.
husband as well.
Right.
But just the handling of those, but he and I, they were sort of trying to give us that space to be young, parents
Mhm.
together, which I really valued. Because somebody
Yeah.
has to be running the dishwasher and going to the grocery
Yes.
and picking up, the other child from camp or whatever it is, right? And so I think, as much as people can take the logistic off
Yes.
of the plate of a new parent, it's just such a gift.
Yeah.
So
And being
that
able,
I was very lucky in that way.
yeah, and it's actually really wonderful that it feels like they got the right memo.
Oh, totally.
because,
Right.
because sometimes the memos
Right.
Not
Sometimes
always
the memo, like
correct,
you
you know?
don't want someone in there like asking you to make them a sandwich when you've just had a baby. Like
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
not super helpful. So like no thanks. So like this, and also like they, again, my mother-in-law and my mother too, like we joke, they would just watch paint dry. They would watch the baby sleep, and they would just hold they would want to sit and hold the baby for 3 hours, which great. I could then walk around and do other,
Yeah.
shower,
Right.
just
Yeah.
call a friend, do all of those things where I didn't have to be kind of, again, negotiating this tiny little baby who can't hold its head up and, just
Yeah.
all like having sort of, again, that just like logistical support. And again, in a way that was like boundaried and helpful
Yeah.
and also, yeah, like letting them be in that role for them, and like that sort of set up, I think, a lot of like ways of supporting the family, which is really, really nice.
Yeah, I think that again, going back to a little bit of that performative space, the things that you're talking about, they're not sexy, they're not
No,
exciting, they're not
no,
postable, they're not
mm-mm.
something that people are like, oh my God, they did that. Like,
They ran
but
the
it's like,
dishwasher. Like, yeah, oh
yeah,
my
yeah,
God, they put in laundry. Like, that was so
yeah.
great.
But I mean,
Oh,
that's the
yeah,
powerful stuff. Like, I think that
absolutely.
that's where we get lost a little bit,
Absolutely.
that you see a lot of stuff that's posted. And listen, I'm not completely against social media. I think
Of
in used in the
course.
right
No,
way, it can be a
absolutely.
great tool of connection.
Absolutely.
I think
Yes.
again, creating those boundaries and knowing like this makes me feel good, this doesn't make me feel good. This
Yeah.
is very
Right.
important. Kind of like,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna swipe whenever it gets kind of
Right.
it's not making me feel good. But the
Right.
stuff that you see sometimes, people kind of focus on these very kind of like, again,
Grand
it's
gestures.
amazing. Oh my God, these incredible, when really it's those small moments
Exactly.
that actually are so powerful for a mother who's recovering from childbirth and a family that's trying to like recover from like
Oh,
honestly the trauma of like
absolutely.
birthing a baby, which is
Absolutely.
not a time to be entertaining and not a time to be like
No,
accommodating other people's feelings.
no.
It's a
Like,
time to like literally heal.
exactly.
And going back to grief, I think we talk a little bit at this idea of like grief is interesting to me. I find that it comes in like little moments.
Yeah,
And maybe like a mom, you can imagine is there taking care of everybody, cleaning up everything, and like pulls out like a dress that she wore before she had
exactly.
children. And then the
Yeah,
grief comes
absolutely.
because you're like, I'll never be able to wear this dress. I don't know when I'll ever be.
Exactly.
So it's like those are the moments I'm asking for people to
Yes.
give themselves permission to feel.
Like I would say two things popped into my head when you were saying that. One is my mom, when I was postpartum with my son, would come in and every day she was, not, we lived in a teeny Manhattan apartment. So she was not staying with us because there was nowhere to stay. So she like, but every day she would come in and she would bring me a coffee from this little pastry shop. And just that connection to the outside world felt so amazing to me because I felt
Yeah.
so like I had lost my connection with like this vibrant New York City life that I loved. And just having that little coffee, like, was this connection. And then when my dad
Yeah.
came in later, because, he came, I don't know, my son was like 4 months after my son was born, and it was my birthday. And he took me shopping. And to your point about the dress, I couldn't wear the things I used to wear because I had just grown
Yeah.
a whole human.
Yeah.
And, you know, so it just wasn't happening. And my dad sensed, my stress about this. And he was always like my favorite shopping buddy. And he
Mhm.
looks at and he goes, I was like, well, Dad, I just don't know. I'm frustrated about this. And he goes, yeah, I get it. And he goes, but it's for a really good
Listen.
reason.
Yeah.
And it was like just sort of redirecting my attention back, like, hey, yeah, you don't have the body you had 4 months ago
Mhm.
or 10, a year ago, but you have other things, you
Yeah.
know, it's
It's
like,
okay.
just be where you are. It's okay. And it
Yeah.
was just so like that acceptance, that just sort of like redirecting,
Mhm.
and kind of helping me, again, it's like the redirecting with my dad and the connecting me to like my old self with
Mhm.
my mom, the person that could walk to get a coffee without having to navigate
Mhm.
the baby carrier and the neighbors and the doorman and like
Right,
all the
right,
things.
right, right.
Like it was just those are small things, but again, to your point, those
Yeah,
are the things that actually have impact. And again, it's not a sexy post, but it's um
but it
most
works.
most of life is not a sexy post. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
but it works. Thank you
but it
so
works.
much.
Thank you for having me. This was a
Brilliant.
treat.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yes,
All right.
likewise.
Take
Bye.
care. All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.